Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Theological Library and a former dean up there in Wheaton at the School of Biblical and Theological Studies. Our purpose in these podcasts is really very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but to live it. Joining me today on Exegetically Speaking is Jason Barney, who's the principal at Coram Deo. We're going to find out more about that in just a moment. He's a graduate of Wheaton College not a few years back, but he joins us today here on Exegetically Speaking. Thanks for being with us, Jason.
Thanks, David Capes. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, how did you get started reading Greek? How did that happen?
Well, I started at Wheaton College. I did my undergraduate degree in ancient languages and English literature. So I began reading Greek. I had actually had the great opportunity in high school of learning Latin. So I was able to do Latin in high school, took the AP exam, and thought ancient languages would be a great thing to go with, which, I know isn't as common these days in undergrad, but I really had a great experience. And having that foundation in Latin really allowed me to come in with an understanding of how languages work so that I could work through Greek and Hebrew during my undergrad and be well prepared to later on do a master's degree in biblical exegesis at Wheaton College, and really enjoyed it and profited from that experience.
Now, you've been involved in classical Christian education for a while. Tell us about the place where you are now, Coram Deo.
Yeah, Coram Deo is a classical Christian school just north of Indianapolis, and I'm the principal there, so I oversee faculty. I really love faculty training and how the classical Christian educational model prepares students so well for, in particular, programs like Wheaton College and work like exegesis. We're doing great work early on that prepares students for that sort of opportunity. I was most previously at Clapham School, a pre-K through 12 classical Christian school, just next door to Wheaton College, meeting in the facilities of College Church for many, many years. So shout out to my friends and former colleagues there. Appreciated that I was academic dean there. I think that the classical education movement has something for exegetes or those who want to study the Bible, because it's a great place where you can go and work and use the languages. I think for a lot of students who go into the languages in undergrad or graduate studies, we're not always sure what we're going to do with it, but we need to be passing on this to the next generation and preparing them. And what a great thing if we could help students learn Greek and Hebrew and Latin even earlier than college or graduate school, like many of us.
You were telling me earlier you started in the 8th grade, and by the 11th grade, boy, they're really just pounding down and doing great work and reading the New Testament.
Yeah, it's true. It's really astonishing to see what students can do. They were reading whole books out of the New Testament throughout their high school years, and to have that going in. I know we have a student or two from Clapham School who are going to Wheaton College now, and they just have this background ready to go.
And the classical Christian movement in education is really exploding right now.
It is. It's been one of the fastest growing movements in private education. And there are a lot of people who I think are rethinking how we do education from the ground up. And one of the things that I've been interested in is really trying to take the thinking of the classical Christian education movement deeper so that we're rediscovering other perspectives on education, biblical perspectives. I sort of focused my master's degree studies on a number of passages in Scripture to try and discern from there as I wrote my exegetical papers and everything like that. I chose passages that I thought would speak to education and discipleship and how to do that in a way that's thoroughly Christian and thoroughly informed by the Bible.
Well, we're going to look today at the ending of the 2nd chapter of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. And to set that up for us, Jason, what are we looking at here? What's going on in this text, and what draws your attention to it?
Yeah, one of the things that draws my attention to this text, reading Aristotle. So I broke out of the New Testament or Old Testament only vein, and have been exploring Aristotle's intellectual virtues. And when we hear the word intellectual virtues, we might just think of things like humility or courage, which on an Aristotelian paradigm would actually be moral virtues. Aristotle had this idea that intellectual virtues are those virtues that help us grasp the truth or possess truth with our minds. And one of them that I think has been really undersold is the intellectual virtue of intuition. And the Greek word that Aristotle uses there is nous. And so we think a lot in terms of knowledge and skills for education, but what about our intuition or our understanding? And for Aristotle, this idea included the starting points for reasoning. We use in our kind of hermeneutical studies today the idea of pre-understandings, that you come to anything that you're going to think about with a certain number of givens. And those are your starting points. They're like your first principles that you use to reason. And I think this idea is really helpful for understanding what Paul is getting at in his discourse in 1 Corinthians, because he says a number of really perplexing things. He, among other things, he says that we should be fools. He talks about the foolishness of the cross. And so at the end of 1 Corinthians 2, as he's trying to undercut human wisdom and human reasoning for this group of Corinthians who are focused on divisions, some of them are saying, I follow Paul or I follow Apollos. There's divisions and they're focused on human ways of thinking. And he's really trying to shake them up and get them to realize that there's a different spiritual frame of reference that they should adopt. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, starting in verse 13, he says, what we are saying is not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual things in spiritual words. And he goes on to say, but the soulish man, normally this word is translated natural, but I think we could even think of Aristotle's normal paradigm of the soul and human virtues that he would get at from a Greek perspective.
Yeah, I think so.
This kind of soulish man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God. Your random Hellenistic person in Corinth is not going to get it, Paul is saying, for they are foolishness to him and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually evaluated. But the spiritual person evaluates all things, but he himself is evaluated by no one. And then he quotes from Isaiah to say, for who has known the nous, the intuition, the understanding of the Lord, who will teach him? But we have the intuition of the Messiah. And that's a really startling conclusion. And again, it's often translated as mind, but as modern English speakers, we think of mind as like the organ that I use to think. And so this idea of intuition, I'm not saying, for all my professors, I'll clarify that I'm not saying that Paul is drawing from Aristotle's intellectual virtues, but I think there's probably this general Hellenistic philosophical paradigm of viewing the preconceptions or pre-understandings that you have. You always have to start somewhere in a train of reasoning. And I think Paul is saying that for the Greeks, man is the measure of all things, in the saying attributed to Protagoras. And Paul is trying to shake them up and say, there's a different frame of reference. There's a cross-centered way to view the world. There's a God-centered way to view the world. And I think that's what he's getting at with this word intuition, where he wants us to kind of reshape our minds. And again, he refers to it, say, in Romans 12:2 as well, saying the renewal of the mind. How would you renew your mind? How could you have Christ's mind? That's kind of hard to get your head around. But if you think of it instead in terms of how your intuition is going to be reshaped as you start to see things from an entirely different cross-centered perspective. So,
and all that is really the intuition there of Christ. I like that. I like that. The intuition of the Messiah. A really interesting way of thinking about this text today, Jason. Thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
great to be with you.
Thanks to Ian Rosine, Rebecca Larson, and Silvio Vasquez, who help us produce this podcast. Thanks as well to John Alonzma, our Wheaton-based director, who makes this podcast possible. We're grateful to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, then you need to consider Wheaton College. Whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, we have amazing programs, a first-rate faculty, and some of the best students in the world. So go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions about this or any of our podcasts, we'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions or questions about any passage in the Hebrew Bible or Greek New Testament, send us an email and we'll see if we can get one of our experts to weigh in on that for you. Our email is exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.